Our main focus was looking at housing affected by coastal erosion in England by looking at the distribution and consequences. For our research, we looked at how houses are affected by levels of coastal erosion and how they are compared to areas that don't have coastal erosion. Over the years, hundreds of houses have been lost to coastal erosion due to cliffs eroding further back and exposing vulnerable houses. Cliffs that are made up of much softer rock will erode faster than that made up of resistant rock. The reason behind choosing north, south, east and west was so we could get an accurate representation of how much coastal erosion is happening around the country. Looking at which areas are the most and least deprived will tell us if this makes any difference in the level of coastal erosion in a particular area. Overall, with the data we collect, we will produce a detailed report as to how coastal erosion affects houses across England. Our overall aim was to identify whether coastal erosion affects house distribution in England. There were several objectives we planned to examine, which included looking at different areas across England to get a broad image of which part of the country experiences the most erosion. We also looked at whether areas with more coastal erosion than others are more or less deprived and which type of properties are more or less affected. By using this information, it allowed us to create a timeline of coastal erosion events that have already taken place. We have also found information on a few management schemes that have been put in place in the UK. For our methods, we primarily used secondary data to conduct our research. This gave us an accurate representation of all the information we needed. Most of our research is only obtainable through secondary data. The use of secondary data also gave us the chance to create maps and graphs to show our data. Figure 1 shows a range of news articles and trust pages that have reported coastal erosion and the distribution across the English coast. The distribution of coastal erosion in England can clearly be seen as a wide-ranging and important issue, affecting all types of areas from more affluent to the more deprived. There is widespread distribution, which means there are varying levels of consequences towards housing, depending on where the coastal erosion is taking place. These can be seen in more detail with case studies shown on the upcoming slides. The overall erosion rates of North Yorkshire are roughly at 1.43 metres per year, and when defence stretches are removed, it can be up to 1.63 metres. Along the coastline, where the plain of Holderness meets the North Sea, it is said to be one of the fastest eroding coastlines in Europe. Skipsea is a small town with a population of around 700 people that are greatly affected by erosion. Back in January of 2020, residents saw their gardens disappearing into the sea due to huge waves destroying their homes. The council has said that, from recent reviews, 24 homes will be at risk at 2025 and almost 237 by 2105 if more defence isn't put up to save them.
Houses on the southwest coastline are mostly unaffected by coastal erosion, which therefore means that the prices of the properties are actually on the increase due to their desirable locations, with the average house price costing around £250,000. For example, Sandbanks and Sandford Cliffs, which are both in Dorset, are two of the most expensive coastal towns in the country, with average house prices of £1.24 million and £1 million. Rock in Cornwall is another with an average property price of £1.4 million. The lack of coastal erosion in the west is clear due to the very small amount of coastal defences prevention methods which are set up. This is clear from the map as to where the coast is highlighted pink, there is no active intervention. This means that the coastal towns are not at risk of being eroded, which can therefore justify the rise in house price for the desirable location. However, the southern coast of England has been greatly affected by coastal erosion, and many areas along the south are some of the worst hit areas in the country. As you can see, the slide shows a snapshot of areas that have been affected. This is really just a dent on the bigger picture, with areas all along the coast being at risk from going the same way as Fairlight Cove, as seen in the above picture, where a home is falling off the edge of an eroding cliff. Other areas are also at risk, like the above, include Burling Gaps Chalk Cliffs in East Sussex, where in June 2017, a 24-year-old student was killed as a large amount of the cliff fell away as she was peering over. Coastal erosion along the south coast, as well as in England as a whole, is something that is greatly worrying, and by the 2080s, if things aren't done to prevent further erosion, annual costs of coastal erosion in the UK will reach £126 million. The graph on the left shows data collected on Zoopla and Rightmove for the 10 most at-risk areas in England of coastal erosion. It is clear to see that Sunderland and Bognor Regis have the highest amount of properties for sale, with a total of 572 and 532. Hapisburgh and Camber Sands have much fewer, with only 6 properties for sale. Compared to the graph on the left, there are many differences, including that there were no properties on sale in Camber Sands, and Sunderland has a much higher amount of 972. However, both graphs are similar in the fact that most areas have houses up for sale, which means that there are plenty of properties up for sale that could be greatly affected by coastal erosion in the future.
Fig 9 shows the number of properties that are affected by erosion at present and the predicted numbers that will be affected by 2100. As the graph shows, there will be a huge increase in the number of residential and non-residential buildings that are affected by coastal erosion by 2100. The current high estimate is 5,489 for residential properties, and this number is expected to increase to 82,100 by the end of the century. This means that potentially by the end of the century, over 80,000 homes could be in danger of being lost if improvements are not implemented. The high estimate number of non-residential buildings that are currently affected is 3,451, with that expected to rise to 25,200 by 2100. This means, in total, an estimated 107,000 properties could be in danger of being affected by coastal erosion by 2100. Affected by erosion, more or less deprived. To find out how deprived areas at risk of coastal erosion are, the Index of Multiple Deprivation, abbreviated to IMD, is used. The IMD uses 7 domains that combine to determine how deprived a small area is, which can be seen in Figure 7. According to IMD, there are 32,844 small areas in England. They are ranked in terms of these contributing factors, with first being the most deprived and 32,844th being the least. The contributing domains don't have equal weights in terms of their percentage makeup of the index. Income and employment each make up 22.5%, education and health holding 13.5%, and crime, barriers to housing services, and living environment only hold 9.3% each, as shown in the image. Clear to see that there is no significant evidence to support a statement that suggests there is a relationship between small areas at risk of coastal erosion and their deprivation ranks. Figure 11 shows the top 10 affected towns have varying ranks in the deprivation index, none of which are in the top or bottom 1,000 most or least deprived areas. Therefore, it is fair to conclude that there is no correlation between areas affected by erosion and deprivation levels. 12 shows the number of transport links affected by coastal erosion both now and at the end of the century. As you can see, the amount of public roads are the most affected, with an estimated 602 kilometres to be affected by 2100. Railway lines are estimated to be the least affected transport link in the future. However, there is still expected to be 76 kilometres at risk, with only a current 12 kilometres affected. This is a concern as many people use trains to commute, which could have an impact on the area's economy. Motorways are currently the least affected out of the 3 sites, with only 6 kilometres under threat from coastal erosion. However, by the end of the century, the high estimate increases to 93 kilometres, which makes it the second most impacted. Figure 13 again shows data for present day and end of century, but looking at the impact on land that is a site of special scientific interest. The high estimate for current day is estimated to be 800 hectares, and this is expected to rise to 3,500 by 2100.
This slide shows a few examples of coastal management schemes that have happened in England to try and prevent erosion from occurring and therefore protect the land beyond the cliffs. Coastal management in England is shifting towards using soft engineering methods, for example, a salmon replenishment scheme that took place in Norfolk, which was inspired by the large Dutch engine. Figure 15 is showing 3 locations in England where mandatory alignment has occurred as a form of coastal management. It's seen as a more sustainable approach in comparison to hard engineering methods, seen one of the ways moving into the future that we use more often. In 2013, the mandatory alignment scheme in Medbury, Sussex was completed. Figure 16 shows the rolling 5-year real-time average funding for flood and coastal erosion risk management in England. Figure 16 shows the 5-year average between 0506 and 0910, £671.3 million, going up to £821 million between 14 and 15 and 18 and 19. This represents the fact that due to increased erosion on the English coast, overall government funding has had to be ramped up to deal with the growing issue. This is a direct monetary consequence of coastal erosion in England. Coastal erosion is costly and key defences maintained, which are often only short-term temporary solutions, and with the issue of increased erosion causes the need for an increase in funding. Overall, the general conclusion that we came to based on our research and the information available to us is that coastal erosion in England has a widespread effect on housing, with the consequence of increased coastal erosion growing. Consequences vary from economic issues and funding to social aspects of people losing their homes. Consequences also come to a wider sense, where coastal defence is in the argument to what is best type of defence that allows for protection in a sustainable and manageable way. We found that areas on the south and east coast of England seem to have greater levels of erosion, and the housing in the areas are at greater risk than areas to the west coast. Moreover, as stated, due to the increased risk of coastal erosion and its threat to the people's homes and livelihoods, it is apparent that greater levels of spending and funding is having to be made by government and local agencies to slow or stop the increased erosion rate, and therefore allow these areas at risk to still maintain their quality of life, which could be seen on the previous slide with Figure 6. House insurance prices is one piece of information we really wanted to obtain. This was because it would show directly the consequences of coastal erosion to people living in these areas and how insurance prices may differ due to the area they live in. It would potentially have shown how there is a varying distribution of house insurance prices across England's coast depending on the severity of erosion. The last two limitations that could have allowed us to obtain a more in-depth base of research and improve the overall presentation would be able to get primary research and also actually being able to meet as a group face to face.